Perfect. That's fine. All right. Microphone's working? Great. Thanks, everyone, for coming to the Xarray tutorial. Hopefully, you're all in the right place. We're going to be talking about the Python Xarray library over the next 4 hours. And to get started, we'd love to just know where everyone's coming from and a little bit about your background. So we're going to try this short Mentimeter quiz. If you could scan this code, or on your laptop, if you go to menti.com and enter this code, you should see exactly the same thing that's on the presentation here. So I'll just give everyone a minute or two to try that. Great. Yeah, I see like thumbs up happening in the bottom right. So I guess that's an indication that it's working. Yes, great. All right. So go ahead and just take a minute here and tell us about yourself. So whatever you consider your profession to be, we'd love to know just a single word or something that describes the work you do. Nice. And again, if you're just showing up, we're just getting a feel for who's in the room here. So you can go to menti.com and enter this code up at the top, and you should be able to respond to these questions. Yeah, great. So we've got over 50 people in the room, or someone is entering a bunch of things. It looks to be over 50, which is great. We're really happy with this turnout. And it's always neat to see kind of the diversity in professions and careers people come from who have interest in the Xarray library and are using it in their work. Looks like software engineer and data scientists are standing out today. But you'll notice, yeah, some other interesting domains in there: oceanographers, nuclear physicist, healthcare. Great. Yeah. So we hope that everyone in the room today, regardless of what domain you're coming from, will find something useful, some code examples, or just some ways of thinking about analyzing your data that you can take away from this tutorial at the end of the 4 hours. Also, just quickly, what is your experience with Xarray? New to Xarray, maybe you've never used it before, or you've taken a glance at the documentation. Familiar, meaning you've used it a little bit, know the basics, or if you consider yourself to be an expert that uses this library regularly, knows your way around all the functionality of the library. Awesome. So it's a good mix. Like to see that. When we design the content for these workshops, we try and be a little bit flexible and adapt to how people are encountering the material. So it's always good to just have an idea of what people's experience level is. We wish we could have asked this well in advance, but we'll just do it today. And finally, we'll go ahead and just do this question now while we're already on this screen, and then come back to this later with some additional questions. But just in, a minute here, a sentence or a couple words about a topic you're interested in today. Great. Yeah, I see people asking about efficiency in their workflows. This is something we'll definitely cover. Why Xarray is better than NumPy. I don't know if we'll convince you of that, but you'll see why it's especially useful for certain data sets. And Xarray, of course, builds on top of NumPy. Without NumPy, Xarray just wouldn't exist. And so you'll also see how Xarray, I think, is complementary to a lot of other Python libraries out there, and how it kind of fits into the broader ecosystem of Python tools. Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening now, but that's okay. Oh, interesting, yeah. We'll look at that later. I'm new to this Menti platform, so that's what I'm learning today. I'm also, I should say, I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. I'm Scott Henderson. I'm a research scientist. I work up the road at the University of Washington at the eScience Institute and Department of Earth and Space Sciences. I'm a geophysicist, and I'm helping coordinate this material today with the help of a great team of people. Jessica Scheik from University of New Hampshire, Nagin Shivani, yeah, go ahead and wave, from NCAR. Witsi, gosh, I knew I was going to butcher this name. Sorry. Witse will be able to pronounce his name very accurately when he comes up to the mic in a bit. Joining us from Edinburgh, and Luis Lopez, who works at NASA NSIDC, and Max Jones, who works at Carbon Plan. So we've had a bunch of people contributing to this content today. People are going to take turns up here presenting so you don't get bored of any one person. And it's just been awesome to help put this content together with everyone involved. So the material we're going to go over today, I'm going to try and make my screen a bit bigger. Is that people in the back able to see? Great, thumbs up. So the Xarray tutorial content lives on GitHub, and I'm just going to walk everyone through how this content is organized and how we can get started on running code examples together. So if you just Google search for Xarray tutorial, I'm going to start there. The first thing that comes up is probably the website. So if you're here on the website, the way to go back and forth between the website view of all the material we have is using this GitHub icon in the top right. So there should be a link to the repository. So I want to illustrate how this works, because one thing I really like about the Xarray tutorial content is that it uses Jupyter Book to render this website that makes things, I think, fairly straightforward to navigate if you're not wanting to execute code examples and just follow the narrative. And then we'll show also the link to actually running your computations. But all the material we're going to go over today is here on this website. And the other key thing to note is that under this same icon, there's a suggest edit button. And so if at any point you're realizing, oh, there's an easier way to maybe explain this, or this would be a neat addition to this content using some data from my domain, we really encourage people to make those contributions to the content itself. So here on this front page, there's a suggest edit button, and that will take you to GitHub, to the actual source, and that may be a Jupyter notebook or just a text file where you can make suggestions or open an issue if things aren't working. So yeah, we really welcome contributions in that sense. So from the website, if I go to the repository, today we're going to use GitHub code spaces to work, and I saw this used in a tutorial this morning. Hopefully it works as well as it did for all of you. GitHub code spaces is running a server on Microsoft Azure. So it's this instance that we've pre-configured with Python libraries, most recent Xarray, all that stuff is just ready to go. So from the repository under code, you'll see 3 ellipses, and you can click on new with options. And you'll see some options here for where this server is going to launch. I suggest selecting SciPy 2024 from this configuration. And then the rest is defaults that should be fine. Maybe as a quick show of hands, who in the room has used GitHub code spaces before? Okay, just a few. As of this morning. Great. What about mybinder.org or Binder Hub? Same show of hands. Maybe about half. Okay. One thing to keep in mind is just that these services, you should treat them as kind of ephemeral things. This machine is running, we can use it during the tutorial, but you may at some point lose your connection to it and have to re-log in. So I'll demonstrate how to do that. If at any point during the tutorial you're feeling a little bit lost and you could use some one-on-one on-the-side assistance, we passed around sticky notes at the beginning of this tutorial. So they're all different colors and shapes, but just put it on your laptop, on the back of your laptop, and one of us will be able to come around and help you troubleshoot whatever your question is. Also, we'll be taking breaks, 10-minute breaks every hour, just getting up and roaming around. So that's a great time to ask us questions for one-on-one help. And do feel free to raise your hand and ask publicly to the group if you're comfortable with that. Oh, and there is a conference Slack. So maybe another show of hands again. How many people are on the SciPy 2024 Slack? All right. Under the Slack, maybe I'll just open it to demonstrate. Thanks, Max. There's under channels, I think you'll have to browse channels and search for Xarray. And you should see tutorial-Xarray. I'll make this a bit bigger. There we go. So if people could just do a thumbs up or some sort of the emoji of your choosing to Max's theme there, that'd be great. So this is another place where we'll be watching for questions. So if you're not comfortable asking a question about something and live or raising your hand, just go ahead and type it into Slack too. And that way we can continue to address anything that comes up over the next several hours. All right. Great. So the code space that we just launched, it does take a while to actually open. Generally, it's going to take a few minutes to actually go from creating this server to you being able to run code. So just wait for that. I'll show you how to get back to it in a minute. The other thing that you might want to be aware of for how to get back to content that we're going over today, from the main tutorial website, tutorial.xarray.dev, over on the left here are all the content that we have categorized into different groupings. So you're free to explore this material on your own time over the week. Please just get our attention during the conference and ask questions about this material if you're going over it yourselves. Today we've handpicked a few topics to go through in order. So on the left here, as you scroll down under workshops, you'll find a plan for today. So we're going to try and stick to this pretty closely, this schedule. At least, we'll reconvene after these breaks at the kind of 2:30, 3:30, 4:30 mark. But these are the topics and links to the notebooks we're actually going to cover today. And at the bottom here, this is an alternative way to opening up that GitHub code space, is clicking the button. Okay, so to start things off, we're going to spend some time explaining the Xarray data model and going over the basic data structures of the Xarray library. If you want to just follow along, the rendered kind of notebooks we're going over are on these links to the right. And I'm going to show you how to get to these notebooks in the GitHub code space now. So when this GitHub code space opens, you should see something like this. Maybe another quick poll, just a thumbs up if you see this on your laptop. Great. Okay, and again, if you're having trouble getting to that point, just sticky note on the laptop and someone will come around. So this is VS Code. And I think that working in Jupyter Lab is actually a bit easier for following the notebooks that we've put together. The rendering is a little bit more consistent between what you see in Jupyter Lab versus what's on the website. So, excuse me, in the terminal here, you'll see a couple links. These links are to open up Jupyter Lab, and you can Command or Control click, depending on your computer, one of these links, and then open. If you see a screen asking you for a token, and apologies, this is a little bit cumbersome, but the token string is printed out in that terminal. So you would copy just the token piece. And now we're in Jupyter Lab instead of VS Code as our interaction with this computer. Give people just a minute for that. I'll also illustrate one other way of getting to this point. So if you navigate to the Xarray tutorial GitHub repository, at the very beginning, we demonstrated creating a code space. If you've already created one, under this green code spaces menu, you should see one that's marked as active. And for this active code space, these three buttons, the three ellipses, gives you an option to open in Jupyter Lab. So that's another way to get into this Jupyter Lab interface to working with the notebooks. All right. How about another thumbs up if you're in Jupyter Lab? Okay. I think we lost maybe a few people in that process. Again, just sticky note if you need a bit of assistance, or feel free to follow in the rendered notebooks, and we can troubleshoot with you at break if you're still wondering about that connection. You can execute code in VS Code as well, but it doesn't show up as nicely as far as the rendering of the content. So whether you're in VS Code or Jupyter Lab, there's a file folder menu on the left, and that's how you can navigate to the notebooks we're going to show. Currently, I'm under this index notebook for SciPy 2024. If I go back a folder, 2 folders, this is all the content that was in the Xarray tutorial repository. So here you'll see different folders to organize this content. And to kick things off, we're going to start with the fundamentals data structures file 01. Apologies here. All right. Okay. Apologies. Let me just go over that one more time. From your Jupyter Lab interface in the file browser, we can navigate into different folders for the content in this tutorial. And what I'm showing currently is just this data structures file. Don't worry about this first part getting connected because we're actually not going to run code for a minute or two here. But I'm going to close this index just to make this file bigger. There we go. Okay. And is that font still big enough for people to see in the back of the room? Great. Okay. Yeah, and again, if you're having trouble with that code space connection, we'll definitely work with you. People are roaming around the room, and we can sort it out during the break. But I do want people to kind of just focus on the figures that we're going to show in this next section, and not necessarily the code and executing code currently. So Xarray is really focused on n-dimensional data, or tensors. And there are many data sets that fit into this kind of cube of information where you have orthogonal indices or dimensions that are labeled by physically meaningful coordinates. And so an easy kind of example of this, I think, are stacks of images or stacks of observations at a point in the Earth. In NumPy, someone brought this up earlier in our kind of Mentimeter Q&A. What's the difference between Xarray and NumPy, or why is Xarray better? And it's just different in the way that it allows you to interact and subset and extract data you're interested in. And the key difference is that you tend to always work with labeled dimensions. Instead of indexing into an Xarray data set as kind of square brackets 0, 1, 2, where you can't remember if 0 was X or 0 was Y or 0 was time, we're actually going to write out the labeled dimension when we're writing our code. So dimension equals time instead of axis equals 0. And that's kind of just the fundamental way you operate with Xarray objects. Schematically, I think this diagram is very helpful. So n-dimensional data, an easy kind of conceptual depiction of what this can look like is a uniform cube where your data variables are represented, are coming from some sort of weather forecast. So this blue data set on the left is temperature. We might also have other physical observables. So you might have pressure as well. Your coordinates are separate from what you're observing with your instrumentation or your satellites or whatever is making the measurements, but they're physically meaningful. So here we have latitude and longitude as coordinates for this weather forecast. And those coordinates need to be assigned to some coordinate system. And that's where this concept of dimensions comes in. So when we say that latitude equals 0, what is the meaning of that? And for Earth's surface, there's a clear meaning of being on the equator. We have some sort of grounding in a coordinate system, and this data doesn't live independent of that coordinate system. So dimensions, we might have x, y, or latitude, longitude as orthogonal directions, and you might have time as well for a weather forecast, and you would need also in that case a reference time for what is time equals 0 for this particular data set. So all of these things we're going to consolidate into a Python object to work with. And schematically, this is the Xarray data set. We have multiple variables, coordinates, dimensions, and you might have, in addition to that, some arbitrary metadata that you want to add into the mix. So some sort of notes about how you collected the data. And we want to keep that all together and carry it through our computations. You'll see a lot of tutorial data sets with Xarray that use some sort of earth science example, but it's not limited to just earth science. So we know that there are some folks in the room who work with who are coming from healthcare. I would love to chat with you and think about ways to work with whatever data you're using day to day and think about how it fits into this framework. We just have another kind of brief example here showing how Xarray was used to construct a data set for mosquito genetics. And so on the left is a graphical schematic of this particular multidimensional data set. You have kind of a gene sequence running top to bottom. Samples are per mosquito, so you've got mosquitoes left to right, and then each mosquito has kind of 2 observations belonging to it. So it's just a different way to kind of think about how maybe we don't have earth science data in latitude, longitude, but we can start to construct these multidimensional representations of the data we're working with. So for this example, the dimensions are variance, which top to bottom is this genetic sequence, samples, in this case, each mosquito, and this ploidy dimension, which are the two cells going kind of back to front. It's okay if these terms are confusing or don't make sense, but kind of graphically, we just want to illustrate that Xarray works very well for any data set that you can manipulate into these multidimensional data cubes. So just keep thinking about that as we go along. So the first kind of code we're going to explore, and I'll show you just navigation again under Jupyter Lab. You're going to explore in these different folders to get to these notebooks. Under fundamentals, there's the data structures. What is this actually? The full name. O1 underscore data structures dot IPyNB. So with this notebook, Jessica is going to walk us through it. Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. So apologies for those of you who are having trouble getting into code spaces. We should talk to GitHub about that or something. Yeah, so our goal for this part of the tutorial is to just help you understand the basic data structures of Xarray. The illustrations that Scott showed, I think, are really great visuals to try and understand exactly what's going on. But the Xarray data model was originally designed around netcdf files. So if you're familiar with that file format, you can see in a lot of the graphics and explanations sort of a mapping, logical mapping from those netcdf files and then getting into the data structures themselves. Yeah. So again, Scott said if you want to follow along, you're welcome to run these cells, but you're also welcome to just view the rendered content. I will run them as we go. For those of you who might not be familiar with working in a Jupyter Lab environment, to run a code cell, you press Shift and return, or Shift Enter, and that's how you run the cell. And then we have a couple customized display settings you'll see set at the top of this notebook, which just makes it easier to view things as we go along. So the primary two data objects or data structures that exist in Xarray are called data arrays and datasets. Datasets are basically a pile of multiple data arrays. So often it will be something that they're sharing some of those named dimensions and coordinates that we talked about, but then there's multiple variables. So sometimes when you'll see when we're looking through how these objects are represented, sometimes when you select certain parts of your data set, because the underlying structure is a data array, what you'll see printed out on your screen is a data array. But throughout the entire Xarray ecosystem, there's pretty much always an analogous operation that can be, if it can be done on a data array, it can usually also be done on a data set. So fundamentally, you don't have to like super distinguish between these in your head, but it's a helpful sort of building block to know that a data set is just a bunch of data arrays. And then for the purpose of this tutorial, all of the tutorials actually in this book, we have a series of example data sets and some convenience functions that make it easy to load those directly into Xarray. And so that's what you're seeing here. Air temperature is one of those data sets. And so we can load that in, and that's just going to bring in that sample data set for us, and it's going to print out a representation of it that allows us to nicely see what this is. And as Scott said, the underlying pieces of this are NumPy arrays. But what we're allowed to do with Xarray is have those be labeled. So we have our latitude and longitude and time, and we can talk about and work with the data in a way that makes sense to our mental map of what the data is showing us, as opposed to remembering that latitude or longitude or time is the first, second, or third axis of our data. And then within those data sets, and I'll talk more about what all of these pieces are that you're seeing are in a second. Within each of those data sets, we can access the individual data arrays, and we can do that using a couple of different syntax methods. So if you're familiar with Pandas, they're very similar methods. You can use dictionary-like syntax, so putting the name of the variable in square brackets, or we can access it using the dot syntax. And so these are just multiple convenient ways of working with the data. Then there are two different ways that we can think about the data itself being represented. So that's an HTML versus a text. What you're seeing in the notebook is this HTML style. And that's the default. That's usually the one that's the much nicer to look at. It's much more human readable format. But you can also look at it as text, which I suppose could be useful if you're trying to somehow parse that text apart. But it certain like developer environments will by default show you that text output. So it can be good to have a comparison of what the two of them look like next to each other. So now that we have our data set, we've printed out what our data set looks like. We can see here it's telling us that it's a data set as opposed to a data array. So that just back of our head gives us some information about the fact that this has multiple data arrays in it. We know there's multiple layers of information here. And then we have our dimensions, and the number after so the dimension name is what's here in bold, and the number after it is is the size of that dimension. So it gives us a sense of how big our data is. And there are some explanations for all of these as well underneath this representation, so you can refer back to it. The coordinates is an unordered list that contains the coordinate values themselves. So again, we have latitude, longitude, and time. And you can see that in this case, all of our coordinates are bold because they are also dimensions. They are dimensions as well as coordinates. The coordinates is where the actual values are. The dimensions is the name for sort of each layer of data. And then we can see here we have a data variable, in this case air, and air is a function of time, latitude, and longitude. So the shape and structure of our data variable is going to depend on one or more of these coordinate dimensions. And that's what's sort of it tells us right here which things that variable is relative to, what the dimensions of it are. So for some of you, if you're relatively new to Pandas, you might, or to Pandas, to Xarray, you might not remember a time before this cool indexes feature was there. But this is a relatively new introduction, last couple of years, to Xarray. The indices have always been there, but they've been hidden from the user. And now we've made them explicitly visible to the user to make it possible to have more flexible index patterns. I don't know if that's something we'll cover. I think we'll cover that a little bit in some of the later tutorials, talking about the different ways that you can index your data. And then last but not least is your attributes. This is a great dropdown. In this case, it's telling us where the data set is from, but these attributes can be any values that you want to store to go along with your data. Keep track of the metadata for it. So we can quickly show, as I said, that sort of text string representation of the data. And you can see the similarity here. We've got our dimensions and their size. And instead, we can tell which of our coordinates are coordinate dimensions by whether or not they have this asterisk next to them. So as I mentioned earlier, a data set is made up of multiple data arrays. So in this case, we can zoom in on what is an individual data variable, and it's there. In this case, our data set only has one variable, and that's the air variable. And so that air variable is a data array, and this is what it looks like. Again, it's a very similar representation that you can see, with one of the primary differences being that we now see actual data values here next to this. this stacked block symbol, we can see the actual values for some of those error data points. I think, so I'll skip ahead a little bit, but I think one of the things that I really want to highlight is the named dimensions component, which is, again, what Scott said. We don't have to remember to which dimension of our data set that underlying array is latitude, longitude, or time. And instead, we can see what dimensions does our data have, and we can access our data along those dimensions using the names. And similarly, we can see what coordinates our data has. We can see the different data types that each individual set of coordinates has, and we can see the values. A little bit about the coordinates. There are a lot of different valid input types for your coordinates. These include other data array objects. It can be a tuple, where you supply your dimension values, your data values, and your attributes. Or you can supply a one-dimensional NumPy array or anything that can be coerced into a NumPy array. So it can be, as we saw, we can have datetime objects, numbers, strings would also be valid to put there. And then we already talked a little bit about the attributes and the different metadata that can be stored in those. So last but not least, if you're familiar with working with Pandas, there are a lot of great convenience arrays for getting to and from Pandas series, to and from Xarray data array and dataset objects. And so we showcase that here. If we have a really simple Pandas series of ones, we can convert that to an Xarray, and now we can see it's automatically created a dimension called index. That index is a coordinate index, as we can see here, and that index has the values a, b, ... through j. And the values of that data array are shown here. All happen to be 1, as we've set it up. And then the reverse of that is that we can also go back to Pandas with that data array. So this can make it really convenient for different types of manipulations that you might be trying to do if you're trying to go between these bigger gridded data sets or need a more table-like data set for some of the Pandas functionality. Going to say, and we can specify the particular Pandas object that is used by explicitly calling series or data frame, and that allows us to take advantage of Pandas multi-indices for these bigger, more complex data sets. So if we take that original data set we were working with earlier in the tutorial and turn it into a series, we can see that it's now created this Pandas multi-index that includes time, latitude, longitude, and our data values. And vice versa, we can, and we can do the same thing to turn it into a data frame. I think that's, yeah, huh? I think I'm turning things back over to Scott now for the next.
Are there questions?
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Are there questions about that first section about describing this data model?
They come up later.
Yeah, there's a question in the back.
Could you just, in like the 2-year-old explanation of the dimension versus coordinate?
Yeah. It's a great question. It actually comes up a lot, this kind of conceptual distinction. I tend to think of it as the dimension is the name of your axis, and the coordinates are the values along that axis. So you can call that axis whatever you want, but it's in the examples we've gone over, we're calling it lat, and then we lay out the coordinates along that dimension. There are, I'm sure, other ways of describing that. There's another question up front, and please ask questions in Slack too. Yeah? So a question over the wording of the description of coordinates and how there is the case sometimes where you have two-dimensional coordinates, and so you might have curvilinear grids or things where, in the case of latitude and longitude, your longitude value spacing depends on your latitude is an example of where maybe the grids aren't clearly orthogonal, and so you may not have completely orthogonal axes, and you can still store that information, but kind of the clean example is where you have orthogonal dimensions and you have a single coordinate value progressing at a uniform step size. So most of the examples we go over today are dealing with that case. Yeah. I think some of it too will just become clear with practice and doing some of the selection exercises that we have coming up. So yeah, let's see. We've got to break it now, I think. So let's go ahead and take a break, and then we're gonna get into like more active coding examples and some of the more indexing and selecting data based on these dimensions. I think that practice will make the data model also a bit more clear in everyone's mind. So take a break, stretch, and we'll be back at 2:30, and definitely just come up and ask questions during the break too, if you'd like.
If anyone else was having trouble with code spaces and wants help during the break, please just put a sticky on your computer and we can come over.
All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started with this next section. So thanks, everyone, for coming back. Again, we're going to take these 10-minute breaks every hour just to give people a chance to get up and move around regardless of where we're at. So over the next 10 minutes, I just want to go over basic indexing. I think this will be a little bit more hands-on. And the content's actually going to ramp up in kind of difficulty and challenge pretty quickly, I'd say, over the next hours. So yeah, now we'll just look at some basic examples of how to select data, and then we're going to look at more sophisticated kind of indexing operations, and also working with data sets that are large, remote data sets, things that kind of go beyond the simple tutorial example data set. So that's the direction we're heading. But for now, let's just spend a few minutes looking at the different operations used to index into these data structures that Jessica told us about. So the data array and the data set. We have a few fundamental operations in Xarray that are the iCell and cell methods. And so we'll see how those differ. And then we'll look at kind of the special case of working with dates and times, which is super common. And Xarray has some really nice like conveniences built into the syntax for working with dates and times in your coordinates. So let's go ahead and just kind of go down to the code to show you where I'm at under our workshops, SciPy 2024. Just going over this basic indexing notebook. So from this index, you can get there. Or you'll notice that the notebook name is 02.1. So another way to get to this is fundamentals 02.1 indexing basics. All right. Similar to Pandas, if you're used to using a .loc method in Pandas, you can use that. You can also still index data arrays with integers. So you can do this just as you would with a NumPy array. You can use integer-based selection into a data set. But the thing you can do with Xarray that you can't with these other libraries is using these iCell and cell methods, where you specify the name of the dimension and then the value that you're extracting along that dimension. So for example, you can do iCell, which is an integer-based position, or you can do cell, which is the actual physical value that you're selecting. Let's go ahead and look at some code that does this. I think it'll make it much clearer. So we're going to work with the same air temperature data set. And we're going to extract from this data set a single data array, which is this air variable. To illustrate the difference between NumPy and Xarray, you can always extract this NumPy array from the data array. So .data will give you back the NumPy array, and then you can use NumPy. So if you're accustomed to NumPy, we can do indexing based on axis position and value. But it's hard to know. I can't remember, was this the first time step, or was this the first latitude or longitude position here? The ordering of these dimensions gets confusing, especially as you add more dimensions. But just to illustrate, you can do these operations if you want. You can go to NumPy and work in NumPy. So in Xarray, as I mentioned, you can do the same thing. But it doesn't really take advantage of the Xarray's API. So instead, let's look at iCell. So this is where kind of things, the code itself becomes a bit more intuitive and easier to read. From our air temperature data array, we use iCell to select the 20th latitude and the 40th longitude of our data set, and we plot that. Xarray also has a built-in plot method. This is using matplotlib behind the scenes. And so it's a great way to quickly kind of explore the data you're working with. And here in the plot, we see that the 20th latitude is 25.0 degrees north and 300 degrees in longitude. So these integer positions, you may find yourself needing them when you're writing an algorithm or code, but when you're working and exploring the data, it's generally not the most intuitive way to select the data. You generally start with knowing, I want to know the value at 25 degrees north, but I don't know what integer position that is along my dimension. So instead, you can use the cell method. And we'll illustrate that in just a minute. But you can also do slices instead of just single positional values. So here, again, these are integer slices to extract a certain period of time. Okay, but I want to get down to the cell methods. So this section just explains the connection between NumPy selection. But let's look at label-based indexing, because this is, I think, the more common use case. So here, as I mentioned earlier, we know that we know the position where we want to know the values. So we're saying from our air temperature data set, select latitude equals 25 north, longitude equals 210, and let's plot that. And there we go. So we're seeing air temperature over time for the period that we have for this tutorial data set. Similarly, you can use a slice. So if you want a range of coordinates along a particular dimension, in Xarray, the way you do that is using the Python slice object and specifying the min and max. So there we've subsetted our data in this way, and we get back a new data array. And we can do this along multiple dimensions. So latitude and longitude. So we're subsetting into a kind of smaller cube of data that we want to work with. And drop cell can be quite convenient for excluding areas. So if you, we actually want to drop this particular latitude from our data and this particular longitude and keep the rest. So you can imagine if you're specifying the physical value you want to look up, maybe it doesn't exist exactly in your data set. This is where things become a little bit trickier, and in NumPy and using the integer index, it always exists because you have, you know, the 9th value is there. You don't need to know what the 9th value is to extract it. But Xarray has this method keyword to specify nearest for these cases where you know approximately excuse me, approximately the location of the coordinate in your data. So to illustrate that, let's say our latitude we want to look at is 52.25, and the longitude we're entering in with a high amount of precision. And I'm just going to comment out this method equals nearest to show you what happens. If we don't have method equals nearest, Xarray says there is no, sorry, key error, there is no latitude that equals 52.25 in this data array. So you're getting an error there. But if we specify method equals nearest, you do this nearest neighbor lookup against those values. So the nearest latitude in this data set is actually 52.5. So we're off by a few degrees there in terms of what we were trying to look up. And there are questions, yeah.
Was that because there was that longitude, or it looked at the latitude first?
In this case, you're doing both separately. So neither of these exist in the data set, if that makes sense.
Was the error just about the latitude?
It was, yeah. Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. So there is an order to checking, yeah, which one you're looking up first. Yeah, so the question was, you got a key error saying the latitude doesn't exist, but the error didn't reflect that the longitude also did not exist. If we were to go back up and let's see, we know 52.5 exists, right? So interesting. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So in this case, yeah, we're going to get the key error on longitude. Okay, and then just very briefly, the date time index. Oh, sorry, another question. That is a Euclidean distance. Yeah. Yeah. Good question. So currently, Xarray is not accounting for kind of geodesic distances between latitude, longitude. So yeah, just keep that in mind. The coordinate systems are assumed to be Euclidean systems. So X and Y are the same step. Okay, so quickly going into dates. Time you can select by strings. So you'll notice that our time coordinate is date time 64 data type. But when we select, you can just pass in a string. So for convenience, often type that out as strings. And we find that date in our data set. You can omit precision on these date strings. So you'll notice that we had observations, I think it's every 6 hours in this data set. If I just select a specific date and don't specify the times, Xarray is going to return all the times on that date that exists in our data array. So that's why we get 4 times back. And similarly, you can do that for years. And you can specify times in in different ways. So you can use like May, for example, to specify that you want observations only in May. Slicing is done the same way with these strings. So you can specify, like we saw earlier, a slice, and then your beginning and start. And then you can do date lookups. So you can pass a list of dates instead of a single one. So we can select 3 different dates from all of the dates that exist. And finally, this is another nice kind of piece of syntax in Xarray is that you have this .dt accessor for times. So anything that's a date time 64, you can work with the coordinate with this what's called a DT accessor. So this is, just to remind people, let me add a cell. Our time coordinate here is what we're accessing. And you can use .dt.month to select all times in July. So that would get across all years observations occurring in July, or a specific day, so the 15th day of every month, for example. So that's very convenient. It comes up a lot in the data analysis we typically do. So that's just a quick kind of whirlwind tour of the basic selection. Just spend a couple minutes trying these exercises. Just create a new cell. And these exercises, if you click the solution, you'll see it. There are different ways to achieve these things, so there's no correct one single solution. But just spend a minute trying these two. So the first 30 entries of latitude and 30 to 40 longitude, and then the second exercise as well. And then Nagin's going to go over more advanced indexing examples next. And stickies if you have questions, and then, yeah, ask questions if you're comfortable doing so.
So a data set might have multiple data arrays in it. If I do a select on the nearest, but those two data arrays might have different platforms inside them, would I get like a point at different latitude longitudes because they chose different nearest points in different data arrays? Is that question answered?
Does anyone else want to jump in? I'm happy to. So typically, the data sets, if you have a data set with different variables, you would, if the coordinates are different, you would store those in separate data sets. So you're not going to have multiple variables within the same data set that have like slightly different latitude, longitude coordinates. There is a new structure in Xarray called data tree that you might be interested in. That's a more hierarchical collection of data sets that may have slightly different dimensions, and you can do operations like that you're describing. Yeah. Yeah, I don't either. It's worth a try. Oh, yeah. So there's a question about, can you have a different weighting for nearest selection in Xarray? Currently, no, I think is the answer. So if you wanted to find, if you didn't care about your tolerance for latitude, but did really care about your tolerance and longitude for a match, there's no way currently to, I think, easily specify that. Yeah, you can. Yeah, so the one suggestion up front is chaining your selection. So do a selection on latitude first with a given tolerance, and then select longitudes from that with a different tolerance, for example. So the question there was about, I think, if I understand correctly, like discontinuities in the date line or meridian. And yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but it is certainly true that right now, like Xarray does a lot with latitudes and longitudes, but it's not a GIS system on its own. So a lot of the sophisticated dealing with kind of wrapping of the meridian or things like that, you would use something else probably to work with that case. disconnected, so just waiting for it to start. But I guess for now. Oh, there we go.
Okay, perfect.
Do you want me to open it, or you can? It's under intermediate, I think.
Yes, I think it's under intermediate and yeah.
Okay.
Okay, everyone. Hello, my name is Nagin Sobani, and I work at NSF NCAR. And today I'm here to talk about two different topics. One is the advanced indexing, and the second one is the computational patterns. For going to the advanced indexing notebook, you have to open up the file browser on the left side and go to the intermediate folder. So you should go to the intermediate folder under indexing and click on the advanced indexing notebook. Please feel free to raise your hand or like put up a sticky note if you have problems finding the notebook. Okay, so advanced indexing. Scott mentioned earlier that indexing in Xarray works very similarly to indexing with NumPy, but that behavior deviates a little bit when we are indexing with multiple arrays. For example, when we are using multiple arrays to index the Xarray data array, that behavior deviates from NumPy indexing behavior. To show that difference, let's look at a very simple example. Let's create a 2D 5x5 matrix of values that goes from 1 to 25. So this looks like this. And we can create an Xarray data array from this, and we can give it dimension names, just something, just a dummy dimension name. Okay, so this is the Xarray data array. So these two look very similar to each other. Now let's try to do the indexing with multiple arrays on these two, on the NumPy array and the Xarray data array. So when I do this indexing, the syntax on the NumPy array, it will return a 1D array for me. So it will return 1 and 13 and 25. But if I do the same thing on the Xarray data array, it will return a 3x3 matrix for me. And yeah, so you can see that the behavior is different now from NumPy indexing behavior. And to explain that, we created this figure which can be used for explaining this and the concepts of orthogonal indexing versus pointwise indexing. In NumPy, when we are doing this indexing with these multiple arrays, what it does is that it looks at the pairwise values of the rows and columns. So it looks at row 1 and column 1. So remember, like 0 is 1. So Python is 0 based. So it looks at row 1 and column 1. So this value, it looks at row 3 and column 3. So it will be this, and row 5 and column 5. So it will be this. But when we do the same indexing on Xarray, it will index across the different dimension independently. So it will return this 3x3 indexing. So it will return this 3x3 matrix, and it kind of like finds all the combinations of values. So we'll look at row 1 and column 1, column 3, and column 5. So it will be row 1, column 1, column 3, and column 5. So we'll select all these values, and the same thing for the other rows. And this is the default behavior on the Xarray data array. So this is very important concepts, and I've seen people being confused about like why this indexing behavior is different. So the indexing, the default indexing behavior of NumPy, it's called point-wise indexing or vectorized indexing, looks like this. And the default indexing behavior for Xarray data array is orthogonal indexing, and it looks like this. And this notebook, it has more explanations on what's point-wise indexing versus orthogonal indexing. But it's possible to do orthogonal indexing with NumPy or point-wise indexing with Xarray, and I'm going to cover that next. So under this drop-down menu, you can see how you can do orthogonal indexing with NumPy if you're interested. But since this is an Xarray tutorial, I'm going to move on to the Xarray part. So yeah, we just had that examples earlier today on how just now on how when indexing with multiple arrays, we are indexing across the different dimensions orthogonally independent from each other. And now we're using a real example. We are loading the air temperature dataset. This is the most famous dataset that has been used for tutorials. It's an air temperature dataset from NSEP. So let's load that and take a look at the, so I'm just loading the dataset and I'm looking at the data array. So it looks like this. It has time and it has latitude and it has longitudes. Now let's do the selection for a bunch of latitude and longitude points. And here I'm using iCell. Scott covered that earlier today, and you can see the output of this is a 4x3 matrix, again similar to the example above when we did the orthogonal indexing. We can also do the same indexing with Xarray data array, so we can give, instead of like just an array or a list of values, we can give it Xarray data arrays for indexing. So here I created target lat and target long, which includes a bunch of points, a bunch of latitude and longitudes. And I'm doing the same indexing, and it shows like the output will be, because here we have like four values in our Xarray data array in the target lat, and we have 4 in the longitude ones. The output would be 4x4. And it would be at all the time steps because we haven't selected a specific time. So yeah, this is the default behavior of Xarray data array. But a lot of times in weather and climate data analysis, there are researchers that want to like compare models with observations, and they have a bunch of points, observation points or tower sites, and they want to extract the mol output at those sites, and they want to compare the values at those sites. And orthogonal indexing is not going to work for that. So we have to enable point-wise indexing. And it's possible to do point-wise indexing with Xarray. The key to that is that the indexers should have a shared dimension, and it should be different from the dimension that's already on the data array. So the indexers should have a new shared dimension. That's the key to the vectorized or point-wise indexing with Xarray. So here again we have here just is an example of a bunch of latitude and longitude points for example, this hypothetical case of someone having a bunch of observation points across the US. And if we do this, it will do the orthogonal indexing. This is not the behavior that we want because it will return basically 25 points, while we want to look at just the 5 points that we have the lats and longs for. So what we have to do is we have to create Xarray data array with the new shared dimensions. And here the new shared dimension is the dimension we just called it points, but it can be anything. So here I created this Xarray data array with dimension points, and the same for the latitude points and the same for the longitude points. And now I use the latitude points and the longitude points as the indexer. And you can see it will return just 5 points. So it will return the output for those 5 observation sites for me. And this would be very helpful for those who are comparing like observations versus models and doing some sort of analysis for some tower sites, for example. And you can see the dimensions now is like a time and points is like each one of these dimensions. And here I even created the plots for it. You can see it shows like for each site, and there will be a time series. And yeah, so this is again very, very useful for those who are doing like some sort of observation versus modeling comparisons, and they want to make sure that they are doing point-wise indexing correctly. So there are more details in this notebook. For the sake of time, I'm not gonna go over the details. But are there any questions? Please feel free to raise your hand or put up a sticky note. Go ahead. That's a great question, and I'm not sure the answer. What's that? Yeah, can you repeat the question? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, and the question was that why orthogonal indexing is the default behavior instead of point-wise indexing. And I don't know what's the answer to that. Yes, that's fair, yeah. Technically, we can, yeah, it should be possible to do it without that. I know that that behavior changed in NumPy at some point, like around 2017-ish, but that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to it. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions, I can go to the next notebook, and this would be about computational patterns, high-level computational patterns. So let's go here. If you go here and click on computational patterns, it will open up the computational patterns notebook for you. So in this notebook, we are going to first learn about what are the high-level computational patterns that are available in Xarray, and how we can avoid writing for loops using these patterns and have our codes more readable. So one of the, I've seen that one of the questions earlier today was that why using Xarray versus NumPy? And one of the most powerful things about Xarray is that it helps you write very readable code, readable analysis code that you can easily like understand later. I have done a lot of coding early in my grad school, and then I remember later when I was writing my dissertation, I was like, what's this code doing? And I had like some overhead in reading that. And back then I was using MATLAB. But with Xarray, the code will be a lot more readable. And one of the most powerful thing about Xarray is that the metadata is stored and accessed with the data instead of metadata being stored in your head. I remember like we had that like we learned about that earlier in the indexing section. But I remember like when I was using MATLAB, I had like sticky notes around my monitor that had like the dimension orders, because I wasn't sure like if latitude is my first dimension or longitude. And with Xarray, this is very easy. You can easily access, you can just like specify the dimension name instead of like having to remember which axis corresponds to that dimension. You can also select points based on the coordinate labels. So for example, selecting 50° north. So instead of like having to know like what index correspond to that, you can just do use the cell method and give it a value. And that all these help you write really readable data analysis codes. And the Xarray high-level computational patterns are also helping a lot with that and help you avoid writing for loops. And here is an example of a code. So here first let's load our dataset. Again, here we are loading the air temperature dataset from NCEP. This is one of the tutorial dataset. And here we just like make a plot and just for you to see like what's the data look like. And this is the data array. You can see the wrapper method, and it has like time and latitude and longitude. And yeah, so this is the data that we are going to work with today. So say, for example, we want to do some sort of analysis. We want to calculate monthly means of this data. So this data, the time goes from 2013 through to the end of 2014. And we want to calculate the monthly means. So a lot of my, again, like when I was like using MATLAB, a lot of my codes were I remember they looked like this. I had like, this is a bunch of codes here that does this like monthly mean calculation. I had a list of months, and then here is an empty list, and I loop over all these months, and then I calculate the means for each month, and then I append it to this list, and this would be very cumbersome. It calculates all the means, the monthly means, but it would be very cumbersome, and again, like it's not very readable. This can be replaced easily with one of the high-level computational patterns. Anyone knows like what computational patterns can be used for replacing this whole, like how many lines of code this is? Group by? Has anyone used group by or any of the high-level computational patterns before? It's great. Okay. So yeah, this is a classic group by pattern that can be used for writing this loop. So instead of writing all the 20 lines, this can be written, and here is one way to write it, having a for loop that group by this and goes over each label and group and does the average. But there's another way to shorten this, and this would look like this. So all those code will be replaced with this one-liner. We are grouping this by month, and then we are calculating the means. So that's how, when I say like the code will be more readable, that's how that's what I mean here. Instead of like having this like explicit for loop, we can with Xarray we can write just one liner that does that. There are more details here. Again, I'm not gonna go over the details for the sake of time. But are there any questions in the audience? Please. Yes, yeah, so, okay, so, and I can show you what it means. I haven't actually run through all these cells, so, okay. Okay, so the question was that what this 3 dots means. So if I don't, and the answer is under this note dropdown, but if I don't specify this, what it will do is that you can see, so right now I have like, I am doing the averages over all my latitude and longitudes, and I'm getting one value per month. So you can see I'm getting one value per month. If I don't specify that, what I will get is that I'll get the means over like each one of the latitude and longitudes over time. So you can either like specify the dimension, so you can, for example, I can like say dimension time. It will do that. and here, because we want to just like do the average over all the points, we did the 3 dots. If I didn't specify that, yeah, I mentioned that earlier. If I didn't specify that, I will have like just get the average for each one of the points, and it will be monthly means for each one of the points. Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question, and we are going to cover that later in this notebook. What would be available for that? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so to learn about like computational patterns, one way to think about them is how we learned about the indexing, the index space versus the label space. So first, let's load the data. We have a data, which is just like a 2D data with a bunch of lats and longs. And if I do indexing using, this is similar to NumPy. If I do this way of like indexing, positional indexing, just like giving it values, it will give you the values. For example, it will select the 10th element along the first axis. But what's the first axis and what's the 10th element? We don't know. So what we can use isol, again, we talked about this earlier today. We can use isol to select the 10th element along lat dimension, so that we don't have to memorize like what's the order of our dimensions. Okay, this is better. That's way better. And another powerful thing about the Xarray was that we can give it values and find the values based on the coordinate labels. So here I'm just like saying, okay, give me the value at latitude is equal to 50. So that would be this. So this would be way better. So instead of having to remember all the dimension orders and all the values that corresponds to the indexes for these coordinates, I can do this. So this. The same way we can think about these high-level computational patterns. There are high-level computational patterns over the index space, and there are high-level computational patterns over the label space. So the high-level computational patterns over the index space are rolling and coursing. So rolling, and just by show of hands, who are familiar with these computational patterns? Okay, I see some hands up. So I'm gonna cover those. What rolling does? Rolling operates a rolling window or a sliding window over your data. So, for example, if you want to calculate the running mean or like a rolling average of a data set, you can use the rolling computational pattern, and we'll see that how like the syntax later in this notebook. And coursing operates on blocks. The window would be the same, but it wouldn't be overlapping. So it operates on the like blocks of like windows on your data. So these two are the high-level computational patterns over index space. And under over label space, we have group by beans, and a bunch of variations on group by, and we're going to cover that again later during this notebook. So first, index space with a fixed width. So we want to calculate the running average, like 6-day average of like temperature. We can use rolling, and it's very, very useful for smoothing short-term fluctuations. For example, if you want to do data and time series analysis, it's very useful for smoothing short-term fluctuations of data. So rolling supports common reduction methods. For example, it supports mean, sum, count, variance, standard deviation. It returns an object with the same size as the input, and it pads the data with NaN to make this happen. And we'll see that again, and it supports multiple dimensions. So let's again look at the data. We have this data. It was just temperature over the United States. Now let's do a smoothed 5-point running mean in lat and long. Let's look at this and how it will look like. Okay, this is the smoothed down, and you can see around it now is just like white, which is if we look at the data, if I just print out the data, we can see that these values are nan. So it's padded with nan to make that happen. So the output size has the same shape as the input size. And you can apply, there are a bunch of reduction methods that are already supported with rolling, but you can apply any existing NumPy or any existing function that like gets just a vanilla or NumPy array using the reduce method. So for example, we mentioned earlier it has like, it supports mean, sum, variance, but there is this NumPy function called peak to peak, which shows the maximum minus the minimum value of at each point. And you can see how I can apply that is that I can calculate rolling and do a 5x5 average, and then I use the reduce method, apply this peak to peak, and you can see this shows the maximum minus minimum, and it applied that over this rolling. So this reduce method, it will be helpful for applying like different SciPy functions or NumPy functions that are not already supported. So that's something to be aware of. And there is an exercise here. I'll give this a couple of minutes. Feel free to do that exercise, and yeah, continue. Oh, you want to do break now? Yeah. 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 Yes. Yes. Okay. Oh, what happened? Okay, so anyone, any questions? So technically, we could have used the mean because it was one of the supported functions already. But if you wanted to use reduce to apply that mean, and that's how it will work. So we will say reduce, and then we apply that np.mean, and then we created a plot. So that's how rolling works. And I'm not going to cover construct. The only thing to learn about construct is that sometimes you want to, so if let me show you how this works. So here I created a simple Xarray data array that goes from 1 to 10, and it has like a time dimension with coordinates values going from 1 to 10. So if I just do a simple dot rolling, and then do this, it will return this rolling object for me. So if I want to create this and pad this and create this new dimension and create the data, what I have to do is I have to use the construct method, and I'm giving this new dimension name window. And what it will do, it will create this data for me, create this output for me with dimensions of time and window, and you can see this is the rolling averages for like the 5-point rolling average. And you can see it's padded with nans. So that's how construct works, and sometimes you want to use construct for doing different types of computational patterns, and it helps like shortening your code. There are more more details about construct, it's very helpful for, especially because it works very well with Dask as well. So it's very helpful for writing analysis code and climate data analysis code. Okay, so that's how rolling works. The second one that we want to talk about is Corsen. And Corsen is very similar to rolling, but the only difference is that rolling, the window that we were doing operations on were overlapping. And Corsen, it's just non-overlapping windows. So we're just like having block of windows, and we're like applying different functions on top of that. Again, it supports the same reduction methods. Another difference is that it doesn't return the same object size. So rolling was returning the same object size and object shape. But Corsen doesn't return an object with the same shape because we are decimating technically the data. So again, let's look at the data. So just like temperature over the US. And here, just the plot shows it better. Okay. Now let's do Corsen. And you can see I just like applied mean and to calculate the average. And for boundary, you can do trim, and there are different types of like, you can apply the different types of boundary. You can like pad it, or you can trim it. So, and let me plot this. Let's see. So this is the technically lower resolution or the coarser resolution data and how it worked. So again, Corsen supports like mean, standard deviation, different types of reduction methods, but you can also apply a reduction that's not supported. For example, something that like gets a NumPy array and returns a NumPy array. For example, the peak-to-peak we learned earlier that calculates maximum minus minimum. You can apply the reduce method the same way that for rolling to calculate the peak-to-peak value. And you can see how I'm doing that here. This was an exercise, but just for the sake of time, I'm just showing the answer. Okay. Corsen especially is very helpful if you want to reshape your data to, because like by default, NumPy has this np.reshape, but Xarray you cannot reshape the data, and you have to use the Corsen.construct to do the reshaping. And there is an example of like how we created like values from like 1 to 24 for like each month, and then we are reshaping it. There's a good example here in this notebook. I haven't gone through the above cell. Okay. Okay. To reshape the data. Feel free to go over that example. And let's see. Any questions so far? What's that?
Can we use the different, can we give a number for the padding or something like that?
Yes, yeah. So here, you can see. Not sure why this jumps around, but let me show you. So here, when I do the, let's see. Actually, the example here explains this. So here, when I do the Corsen, I am giving it like a boundary pad, and this will like pad the data, and I even can use the dot pad itself to pad it with nans or pad it with certain values. So there is an example here that I am like padding it with like constant values here, like just -1 as an example. Yeah, so there are different things you can do. You can pad it differently, for example, on one side versus the other side. This example exactly shows that, how it will work. Okay, so far we learned about the high-level computational patterns that can be applied over the index space, rolling and coarsen. Rolling was used for overlap when we have overlapping windows, and coarsen was used when we have non-overlapping windows. There were a bunch of reduction methods already supported, mean, sum, standard deviation, and then we learned about how we can apply reduce to apply like the reduction methods that are not supported. And also we learned about how we can use construct to do custom operations. So I know the break is coming up at 3:30. Let's have a short break, and then we can continue this notebook, and we can learn about the label space, high-level computational patterns. Yeah. So Scott, I'm not sure if this is an issue with the touchpad, or you can see it's like jumping.
It's jumping?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on there. Luis said maybe, I'm sorry, don't know what's going on. He said maybe auto-saving is, he said maybe it's the auto-saving that's like causing it to jump. I don't know how to turn it off though. Oh, here.
Let's see.
Let's just see if that.
Hopefully, yeah.
Well, maybe that does it.
Yeah, hopefully that does it.
Yeah, that's annoying though. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries at all. It's not.
Yeah.
I wish we had time to like go over this example of like, I mean, I can follow up with that questions, how like we can pad with different field values and.
Yeah, if you wanna.
I'll probably like follow up with him. Yeah.
We'll check with how much
Yeah.
time to do. Do you think you want to go over the rest of?
Yeah, I'm gonna go over the rest of it. Like it's probably gonna take around 10 minutes.
Okay. Perfect.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My goal is to correctly pronounce his last name. I feel so bad. I just like totally bungled it and tried to get it.
Don't worry. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Okay. Well.
Okay.
That's good.
Sounds great. Yeah. What's that? Okay, we're gonna start shortly, so we're gonna start in 2 minutes. Okay, everyone, so we're going to continue with the high-level computational patterns. So far, we learned about index space computational patterns, rolling and coarsen. Now we are going to continue over label space patterns. And the most popular one is group by, and then there are some variations of group by beans, and resample. The main difference here is that sometimes the window that you want to operate on is not regularly spaced. So the index space rolling and coarsen, we had a fixed window that we were applying it. One was overlapping, the other one was not overlapping. But here, say for example, we want to do some sort of computation over something that's not regularly spaced. So a good example of this is grouping data by month. So one month has like 31 days, and then the other month has like 29 days. So we want to make sure we are correctly classifying each month. Versus, for example, every day has like only 24 hours. So we can use the index space computational patterns for that. So group by technically is very popular among, at least like for weather and climate data analysis. And we're going to cover that now. But group by technically is a generalization of coarsen, but here the window of operation can be like different size, so it can be an irregularly sized window of operation. So a common group by workflow is it's like a 3-stage workflow. And there is an image here from Project Pythia that explains it. So first, we have like a bunch of data that are like from different groups. So here we have like 3 different groups, black and red and blue. So first, we are splitting the data into these different groups. We have like all the black data together, red data points, and then blue data points. And then we do some sorts of like computations on it. We are doing some sort of like reduction, for example, calculating a mean or calculating standard deviation. And then we aggregate the data. And this is a common type of workflow, the split, apply, and combine that is used with group by. For example, we want to calculate monthly means. We split the data by month, we calculate the mean, and then we put it in a data array. And we'll see that in an example. Okay, so remember above we had like a data array. Let's see. This is taking longer than expected to show just the wrapper. Okay. Okay, so we had the data array. It had time and it had latitudes and longitudes. So it was air temperature over like a time series air temperature over United States. We can apply group by, and you can see how it will work. So we'll return a group by object, which is like group the data over different months. And then you can like apply, and this is the first stage of this diagram. And then we can apply some sort of computation over it, some sort of reduction. So here I'm just like calculating the mean, the average. So it calculated the monthly averages for me. And it's just this one liner to do this instead of like writing a for loop. So, and I'm just like here, I'm just like plotting the data, so the time.month, so you can see like how the month, so how the time series data works. So we had like data from 2013 to 2015. We had like 2 years of data, and for each month. And when I did the monthly mean, it gave me back 12 data points, like one for each month over the whole United States, over my whole domain. Group by beans work the same way. Here, it's just the way to think about it is just like histogram. So we can give it a bunch of bins, and it will like bin the data in and group the data based on those bins. So for example, here I'm just like binning the data, and this would be very useful for example, in air quality data analysis, we want to bin the data for particulate matter under certain size and over certain size. So we want to make sure that the data is like binned correctly. And that's how it works here. We're just like binning over the latitude, and it shows like, it creates these groups for you, and then it will like bin the data, like put the data, group the data over that. And resample is technically a variation of group by, but it's over only the time index. So here, I'm just like resampling the data and calculating the monthly mean. Let me show you. So this returns the 24 groups. So if I do the dot mean, it will calculate the monthly mean. There is a big difference here from the monthly mean calculation I did above using group by. So what I did above with group by, it was giving me a 12 by like 12 data points, so one for each month. But when I do resampling, what it does, it just like resample the data for each month. So it will calculate the monthly mean for each year. So the output is like 24 data points, one for each month. And we have like 2 years of data, so it will be 24 points. And I think I have to restart the kernel because the kernel crashed. So, and I have to load the data again. Oops. Let's see. Okay, this might take a while to restart the code space. But I can go over the rest of this using the rendered notebook. Apologies for this inconvenience. I'm not sure why CodeSpace is not cooperating today. Let's see. Here it is. Okay, so yeah, we talked about resample and how this is like 24 points instead of 12 points. Group by is very, very powerful and it's very popular, but one big problem usually is that you don't have distinct groups or you don't have distinct classes to to use group by bit. So, and those who have done like machine learning work, they know that like usually having the data set that has like all the labels associated with it, usually that's the hardest, one of the hardest part is like having and creating that data set. And there are some good functions that you can use for creating these labels and these groups for you, so that you can use group by bit. So there is like NumPy digitized, there's like NumPy search sorted. I'm not gonna go over all of these, but please feel free to take a look at this. One of the most popular one that I've seen that's being used with like time series data analysis is datetime components. And this is the same way of like similar to what Scott was mentioning earlier today, using the datetime accessor to accessing the year or the time. And there is a full list of all the attributes that are available with the datetime accessor. So date, time, day of the week, day of the year. So you can like do group bys using any of these attributes, weekday, anything really. That's available under the attributes. So here we just show the example of how the datetime accessor works. So we had the time here, and then if I use the datetime accessor.day, it will show, it will return the days for me. So it's just like bunch of ones, because like the first month and then the first day, and then it will go through like all the data. And this is the shortcut for also accessing that. So you can use it with like DT, which is the datetime accessor. You can use the time.day. One popular one is the season. So for example, for calculating the seasonal averages, you can do datetime accessor or dt.season, and you can do like calculate averages or seasonal averages. Let's see if the code spaces has restarted. Okay. Okay. Okay, here we are. So yeah, here using the datetime accessor, I can like get to the season and do, for example, like group by season and do like, for example, seasonal averages of my data, and that's very popular for like climate data analysis. We can create custom groups. So for example, in this example, we are creating custom seasons. So imagine you're doing some sort of analysis where you want your seasons, for example, a monsoon season versus like a non-monsoon season, and you want to do seasons that are different from the DJF, December, January, February, like the 3 months seasons that you have. So this example shows how to create custom labels and custom groups, like season groups, and then do like use group by and calculate an average. So here what it does is just like accessing the months and creates this like array of like my season, and then using this logic of like, okay, so if months is like within like 12, 1, and 2, it will be DJF. But like one of my seasons now in this like example, it has like 4 months and the other one has like 2 months. So it says like if the month is within like 6, 7, 8, 9, this is this season, use this label. And if it's like 10 or 11, use ON. And then here I'm just like copying the data, and then now I can like just do group by of like this data array and then calculate the mean. Here for just like the plotting, I'm reindexing this, and then I'm just like plotting this. So it will just give me nice seasonal averages over my custom seasons. Or I could have like used the normal seasons as the example above showed. there are other functionalities within the datetime accessor that help a lot with like some of the more complex time series analysis. And you can see these under, if you check the methods, you can see these under the methods in the datetime accessor. There's like floor, CL, and round. And then there is the SDRF time. These are all very powerful. Again, probably we don't have time today to go over all these, but please feel free to go over these examples. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to help. With SDRF time, if you've used it before, this is very powerful, but it's sometimes difficult to know the syntax. There is this very useful SDRF time website that you can use to decipher the syntax. So for example, I wouldn't be able to decipher this, and I have to use the SDRF time website for deciphering something like this. With group by, you can, so we mentioned earlier, group by supports like mean and standard deviation, the common reduction methods. You can also apply, use reduce to apply any other reduction method that gets a NumPy array as an input. So for example, the peak-to-peak was an example, or any like SciPy functions can be used. And here, this example is just like grouping by month, and using reduce, it applies this peak-to-peak function, and then it plots it. So here it shows like how it plots like for each month. And using this argument, I'm just like giving it, okay, so I want like 4 columns, and then wrap the subplots. But that's how it would work, and it would be just like one line of the code. So this is like, these are examples showing the power of Xarray and how these high-level computational patterns help with like writing readable data analysis code. The same thing, so far all the examples in this notebook was like on a data array, but the same operations can be done on a dataset. With coarsen and rolling, we can use the construct method to create the data, but the construct method would not work with group by. So one way around it is using either like a loop, but technically a loop is sometimes like not what you want. It's like you should think about loops as the final resort. So there is this map method that you can use. Let me show you the map method. So there is this map method that you can use for, instead of like writing a for loop, for applying so say for example you want to group your data by month, and then you want to apply some sort of a function that calculates something for you on this. So instead of writing a for loop, you can use map. And the difference between map and reduce is that reduce gets a NumPy array as an input and returns a NumPy array, but map works with a function that gets the input as a data array. So here, this function, this example, calculates the interquantile range. And you can see using the map, I'm just like applying this interquantile range over this, and you can see how it would have worked. Otherwise, I should have like wrote like the for loop to go over this, to go over each group, and then do this computation over it. So the map is very powerful for applying custom functions on a data array. So yeah, this is a summary of like all the high-level computational patterns. There are a lot more examples in the documentations as well. Please feel free to check that out. These are again very powerful for writing readable code that's also like optimized, and it works with, like, for example, if you have like data that's like lazy loaded using Dask arrays, it will work with Dask arrays as well. We learned about reduce for applying custom NumPy functions that are not supported, and we learned about map. So yeah, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer, or please free to raise your hand or use the sticky notes. If not, we can move to the next section. So has anyone used Pandas in their workflows before? And do you use, like, have you used Pandas group by? Yeah, the Xarray group by works almost very similar to Pandas group by, and that's probably one of the reasons it's the most popular high-level computational pattern that's being used with Xarray. But okay, we can move to the next.
Other side. So I hope everyone got a bit of energy from the snacks. Are we still alive? Happy? Okay. We're gonna move forward and talk a bit about the Xarray ecosystem. And I'm actually gonna skip over Dask probably, but if you do have questions, you could ask. Let's see. Let me make that a bit bigger. Okay, so Xarray is quite extensible. There's, yeah, in a way it's just a way to look at array data and dimensional data, but there are several applications out there as a lot in the geospatial domain, like remote sensing data or climate and weather forecasting, where, yeah, increasingly also in like the biomedical sphere as well. I'm from a remote sensing background. I'm at Space Intelligence, company back in Scotland. We provide nature data using a lot of satellite data and typically load that through Xarray as well. So I'm going to talk you through accessors, backend entry points, metadata attributes, Docker array wrapping, and perhaps flexible indices. I'll just give you some examples. I don't know, just to gauge, are there people in the room familiar with these accessors? Is that, like, if you have like an array and you do like array.rio dot something, does that sound familiar? I see some nodding. Okay. Well, let's just go through it. So this notebook will show you some more imports. So we're not just using NumPy and Xarray, but we're also using some other libraries to get this extensibility, basically. So first example is h3plot, plotting library, which is kind of separate from Xarray, but it's like bolted on top, basically. And there's a separate library called h3plot Xarray, which provides this functionality. We're going to load the same dataset again and have a small look. And when you then have this import, it automatically gives you this nice interface where you get interactive values. You can zoom, click and pan, and that's all just within your notebook. The next one is Rio Xarray. That's tapping into functionality from GDAL, or the geospatial world, basically, where you get a .rio accessor, where you can access attributes of the data, such as spatial resolution or coordinate reference system, which is quite relevant if you're plotting data on a map. But typically, Xarray just isn't aware of this, so you need to bolt that on top for it to be aware of that coordinate represents a pixel of a map, which is placed somewhere on Earth, which can then be projected in a certain reference system. We're just going to load some Sentinel-1 data here from, looks like it's on Amazon. Did I run the previous cell? I probably didn't. That's going to help. And my code editor has like this linter that comments out. It sort of grays this thing out. It's like it says I can't use this, or I'm not using this, but it's using it in the background. So it just automatically picks it up for you. Let me run this again. And by just adding that import, you get the functionality. And in this data set, there's a projection stored, like a coordinate reference system that you can now access through this Rio accessor. And you can also do things like reproject to a different coordinate system. And that's exemplified here. And there's probably some, yeah, that will just give you the coordinates in the new projections. It used to be these XY values in, let me see, like 300,000 something, that converted to just 4326. So that's like lat-long coordinates. Then you can also plot these data arrays in a panel using another library called Panel, and that basically combines HV-plot as well, so you can have multiple of these below each other. And it's quite nice, interactive. You can zoom around. You can reset to where you started. And that eases the comparison. And here you see them in the previous projection and the new projection. Next up is CF Xarray, which is a climate forecast metadata. This is a world I'm not that familiar with, I'll be honest. But basically there's a lot of heritage here with a lot of metadata assignments and agreement on how to call variables. And this standardization is quite helpful if you're exchanging data. And this extension gives you that functionality. I think for the CF Xarray, they have particular names for latitude and longitude, which are conventions they follow here. But correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not the expert here. So there's another thing called pint, or pint, I don't know how you pronounce it, which can assign units to your data. So we can think of this air data, which all of you think might think like, why is this in Kelvin? You can get functionality that it assigns it to Kelvin. Xarray is not aware of that. And then pint gives you the functionality to also like convert it to Fahrenheit or Celsius or whatever your preference is. Similar for like distances, and it basically gives awareness of what kind of units are in your data, and then gives the computational capability to use those, and also give an error when you're combining things that you shouldn't combine. Such as in this one where we are adding like a what is it, a distance with a temporal thing, which doesn't really make sense. Like if you wrap these type of objects into an Xarray, you can do these type of conversions as well. Let me see if I can show that. I think this is an example I added earlier. But basically, if you have a data array, you can do data array.pint, which is the accessor, and then .to, and then convert the unit to something you want. And it's quite good at interpreting things. Like if I put miles, it will probably pick it up. And that will just convert your units and makes it easier for you to pass on data if you're transforming formats a lot, or units. So, little thing where, basically if you have a data array, it can have attributes. And if in the unit, if there's an attribute called units, you can give it a value, and that will be picked up by this Pint library to how to assign that to your data with a docQuantify method. And then you see the little, or the capital K here, and it's aware that it's in Kelvin. Equally, you can dequantify it. You can plot it as well. And then the unit will disappear. Little quiz question, where did the Kelvin go? Because it says that it's somewhere. So we dequantified it, and then it says it will also write the current unit back out to the attrs units field. But I don't see that. I have the attributes here. Exactly. So we have a data set with multiple data arrays, as explained earlier, and each data array can have different units. So we can have an array in Kelvin, another one in Celsius, whatever you prefer. This is an example on how to, or a little exercise on implementing a dimensionality error. Just going to skip over that for now and leave it at that for this notebook. Any questions? Or if someone has a question on Dask, that's also fine. I could go into some materials.
I feel like the useful thing for finding would be like the Kelvins to Celsius for rendering that graph. Is there a way when using data frames to convert to Celsius?
Yeah. So I think what you can do is just do .pint.2 and then you've provided the unit. And it's, yeah, it might be a bit fiddly to find which exact unit, but if you give it like degrees, I think it's deg-C or something for Celsius or deg-K for Kelvin. How are we on time? Should we?
Good. Why don't we take a break?
Sure.
I know we I think we're on time for a break. And then we have our final session. Luis is going to talk about working with remote data. And we'll have a bit of time to work with your own data sets. So I would also encourage you to try that during the break. If you have a file with you, open Xarray to try it. We're around to help you troubleshoot. But yeah, 10 minutes, and then we'll be back here for final time.
I would suggest
Yeah.
we end like at 5:15,
What's that?
just because a little time for like questions and.
You mean, yeah, I thought it was at
So-
5, the actual.
No, but if it's, I think that's even better actually. If you
Yeah.
think half an hour is the right amount of time, just
Yeah, I'll
to
do
give
it
people.
less time.
Okay. Okay. Do you know how to navigate to it?
Yeah.
I moved
think-
I moved the
Oh, yeah, you
locations.
move it. Yeah, so it's in the
Intermediate. Remote data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Hello, hello, hello. Oops. Bits, you're too tall. Perfect. Hi. Oh, no, you're fine. I'm Luis Lopez, and I work for NSIDC, the National Snow and Ice Data Center in Boulder, Colorado. And, well, I want to talk about a kind of a boring topic, but it's really important when we're addressing performance. And that is like, what would you do if your data is remote? That means it's not in your laptop. And one of the notebook that I'm going to present here, it was born out of frustration, like a lot of things when we're trying to figure out how things work and why they don't work the way we think they work. So how many of you have used this file format called SAR? A lot of people. Okay, so SAR, it's a new file format, new for, it's years old, not decades old. And it's a file format that has a lot of advantages to use in the cloud or to use from remote settings. And the main advantage is that you have your metadata in a JSON file, and you don't have to open binary files to see what's in there. Basically, the metadata tells you all the stuff that you need. But in a lot of occasions, you have to deal with data that is not in SAR format. And if you work with data from government agencies, normally that's the case. So let's go to the notebook, and it's in intermediate. Oops. And then remote data. And the notebook is called remote data. So the premise of this notebook is that you want to access some data that says, and this is not necessarily a netcdf file, it could be a CSV file. Well, more generally speaking, with Xarray will be most of the time a netcdf or an HDF5. How many of you are familiar with HDF or netcdf? Okay, a lot. So HDF and netcdf are formats that are very standard for n-dimensional data in a lot of industries, not just remote sensing. Like HDF is used in CERN, for example, to store like collision detection and that kind of stuff. When people wrote and designed these file formats, they did it on a different, with different constraints than what we have now in 2024. And one of the things that I've noticed is that in the Xarray tutorials, it didn't have a lot of content on like how to access those files if they were remote and why it was so slow. When we open a SAR file, like many of you have or use in your day-to-day workflows, it's almost instantaneous because the metadata is in a JSON file. You grab that JSON, and Xarray has all the stuff that it needs to like represent the data because you're not loading the data. If you do that in a binary format, opening a binary format, it will take forever. Have you tried to do that? Have you tried to open a netcdf files on say, S3? The AWS cloud storage, no? Well, if you have tried, you will see that it takes forever. And this is just a diagram that shows kind of like the hierarchy of how can we get, oh, the other thing, like when people designed the file formats, we were on a different age, but we still write libraries as if the data was local or is local. Xarray and a lot of the machinery that we use, the libraries that we use, have this, like open data. And when we say open data, the libraries assume that you're talking to your local file system most of the time. So there is a lot of code out there that will use the operating system to open a file. How you take this paradigm into the cloud era, like how you open a file in S3 and how do you open a file in Google Cloud Storage or Azure Blob. Well, there is this library that was started also not long ago that does some of this abstraction, and it's called FSSpec. How many of you have used or have heard about this library? File system spec in Python? Okay, so many of you, but not all. So what file system spec does is like abstracts the remote file storage that you can have for, mostly the commercial cloud, like this Azure Blob, Amazon S3, Google Cloud Storage, and there are others, like it's not, or FTP even. So abstracts their internals to present uniform API. So what that means for us that we're going to access remote data is that you can read the data as if the data was local in your laptop. And that's very convenient for us. So in here you see when you say open dataset and you talk to, and you pass like an S3 URL, this is the chain that will happen kind of like from right to left. Xarray will be deciding what to use. And then in turn, at the end, we'll talk to FSSpec saying like, I want to open this file, and FSSpec will open the file from whatever cloud storage or remote storage we're talking about. So first, I wanted to like explore what was happening under the hood when you open a file in Xarray. So let's see if you've seen this all day today. You open a file and you see the representation of the data. We actually touched the file. It's in our file system. It's local. So there is a function here that actually needs some updates, because if you run this on a different environment, it will bring, just that slash. What this does is just like all the calls in Python to the Xarray API tell me from, it's a kind of like stack trace. And you see Xarray starts with open dataset, which in turn says like, guess the engine. I notice that I haven't passed, I just said like, open this local path, which contains the file. So I haven't said like, this is an etcdf file or an HDF or a SAR. So what Xarray does, it's to guess which of the pre-installed engines can open that file. And the next thing it does is like, is this local or remote? And then it does other things and it runs a particular backend implementation of open the dataset, which Xarray is kind of flexible in this sense because by itself, it doesn't know how to read file formats. It's just like ask their engines to read netcdf, and it turns out that many of their pre-installed engines have the same kind of like, there are overlaps between the engines. So you can like open a netcdf even with SciPy. And that will be important to access remote data because not all of the engines are equal in that sense. So that explanation. Okay, so now I'm going to tell Xarray the engine. I want to open this file with h5 netcdf, and it doesn't guess the engine this time. You see, open dataset just gets the backend. that I'm asking for, and then it will use the backend to open the file. It's still local file. Questions so far? Have you done this? Like, say which engine you want to use for opening a file in Xarray? And sometimes the reason is because like the default engine won't, there is an order of the engines, and the default engine probably doesn't have all the things that you need. And remote access is one of those things. So just be careful that there is an order in which these instructions are evaluated. So if you pass a netcdf path to Xarray, it will use netcdf4 first, and then it will loop through h5 netcdf, and then if none of the backends can open the file, it'll tell you, I don't have any backends installed to open this file. And if you're like feeling adventurous, you can write your own and like invent a new file format for your arrays. Okay, so I'm gonna list now the engines that we have installed in this environment, which XR backends list engines, and I have the netcdf for h5 netcdf, SciPy, PyDAP, raster IO, and Xarray. So why so many engines, right? Because like we live in a very cosmopolitan world, and we don't agree on the input and output serialization, and well, it's historical reasons too. Some of these engines can open local files, and some cannot. So now what would happen if we try to open a file that it's not in our laptop with Xarray? I'm not saying, like, I just want to open this file. What do you think will happen? Well, it will fail. And the reason is not because Xarray doesn't know how to work with the data in that file. It's because the engine doesn't know how to talk to S3. So it goes there, and it gets a redirect from the S3 URL. And I mean, I'm a netcdf4 engine. I know binary. What is this thing? What is this HTML you're talking about? So FSSpec, the library that we were talking before, helps us with this case. And I have a little table here. If FSSpec can read from a remote location into a buffer in memory, you have options with the library. So you can have, like netcdf4 cannot read from buffers. There is a trick that we'll see here. But h5 netcdf can. So you can open a file with FSSpec, file system spec, and pass it to Xarray, and Xarray will think the file is local, right? So there are other caveats. For example, there are some libraries that are basically wrappers, like raster IO doesn't handle the IO. So when it reads a cog or a TIFF or any raster format, it will use GTL for that. So GTL in turn doesn't know how to read from FSSpec, and then we'll have a problem there. And there are other formats that are very like domain specific, like CFGRIP. I don't know if somebody here has used that format. I haven't, but I know what it is. But you can run into these cases where here's the data, I want an analysis, and it's a very niche file format that you won't open with the default. And most likely the code that you'll find will be like opening a local file. And then you have to modify that to open something that is remote. Another thing, why do we want to open remote files instead of copying it? Well, sometimes the data is too big. Sometimes we're working with terabytes of netcdf files or HDF files, and we don't have the space, and it's something that we'll do probably a couple times, so we don't have to store those 2 terabytes or whatever data, and we want to read only the parts that we are interested on. So here is a diagram. The font is kind of small, but if you see in your screens, maybe it renders better. That kind of like tells you, okay, so if I have an netcdf4 file and I open it with this engine, can I access a remote file if I use FSSpec? And the answer, it's the last box. It's not extensive because the space, but and then we now we are going to talk about something that is really boring. It's it's called file caching. There are two things that say in computer science that people say that are difficult. One is naming a function, and the other is caching. The reason for that is that, well, it depends. Somebody was saying that in the morning. And when we're talking to, or we're not talking, when we're reading data from our local file system, you know the latency and the speed in our local environments, it's in the microsecond. So now we have SSDs, and if you say, give me this, say, 20 kilobytes of data from my disk, it'll be instantaneous. So the operating system is doing some caching, but that doesn't change a lot when we're working locally. It does make a huge difference if we're working with data that is not in our laptop. So that's one of the things that we learned the hard way. And most of the libraries that talk to remote systems have some sort of caching built in. And FSSpec is one. And that's one of the reasons why I started this notebook, because I wasn't aware of the behavior of FSSpec by default. So one of the things that FSSpec does by default, it's a caching that it's optimized for CSV files, text files, but not for binary or scientific data. Okay, so that's the read-ahead cache, which the reason why we have cache, it's so we don't read the same 4 bytes on a remote file system, because that's in I/O expensive. Like the latency there will be, instead of microseconds, will probably be milliseconds or seconds even. Even if you can get a lot of information back, because these systems are designed to handle a lot of requests, that's why we use them. But they are not instantaneous. So now I'm going to talk a little bit of what can you do, like the simplest way. Say that you have a file and you have a library or a backend that doesn't know, and this is like the case of NetCDF4, the engine, that doesn't know how to talk to the buffer, and well, or Grip, I think, also doesn't read remote files. But how can you do to overcome this? Well, the simplest thing you can do is like open FSSpec, use FSSpec as basically local mount. So you say, here's my file in the cloud. I'm using a S3 bucket and HTTPS, because it can be used in two schemas. Under the hood, this is still HTTPS protocol. But I'm saying, here's the file that I need, and it could be your own server. It could be even like behind a proxy if you have the credentials. And I'm saying, with FSSpec, open it locally, which FSSpec will do is to read the whole file and cache it in disk in this location that I'm saying, cache storage in temp FSSpec cache. So then the engine that doesn't know how, of course, to talk to the buffer, but it knows how to talk to this. Oh, I know what happened here. Oh, another thing. The engine that doesn't know how to talk to the buffer but knows how to talk to this will open the file because it's local. So that's what, I know what happened. I think maybe the whole environment. What? Yeah, I'll do that as soon as this is a Mac, so. I think I'm clicking, but I'm not. Well, you know the fun thing about. Thanks, Scott. I don't know why it died. Maybe a time limit. Should I just see the render? Yeah. Yeah, I'll keep, yeah. All right, so this is the render version. Well, once that you open locally and you read the remote file, it will use the netcdf4 as usual because it's local. But if you don't really want to do that and you want to stream the data, then FSSpec can help you if the backend, can read from memory or in Python file-like object, right? But as I said, this is like the takeaway of this section is like, don't use the default caching strategy that comes with FSSpec because that's designed for text, not for scientific n-dimensional data. For scientific data, you don't want a read-ahead cache. You want either a block or, well, there are many other different strategies, but block would basically partition the file in fixed size blocks. And then as soon as your library touches 1 byte, it will fetch the whole block because fetching 4 kilobytes doesn't really make sense in the cloud. So you better go and fetch 4 megabytes if that's the size of your block. And then the next time that you request data from that block, that'll be on memory. You can also cache on disk if you want. So what different that makes? Well, that makes a whole lot of difference between like loading data in these formats, and I've noticed like an order of magnitude improvement on that. Like if you open with the default cache, it could take like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on your internet speed, to like 5 seconds or something like that. So that was the HTTPS. I don't know if the format here for FSSpec is that you say, I want to have a file system. I want to talk to a file system. In this case, HTTP. It's called HTTP. And then you say, I want this caching strategy for when I talk to this file system. And then this, you've probably seen it before, is like opening the file with a context. And one note that I put here is that we should be careful about this because sometimes like we open the file and we exit the context and we want data, but since Xarray, it's lazy in terms of loading the data, that thing that we have outside the context doesn't have the data. So if we do like ds.err.min, it will be an error because FSSpec already closed the file, right? And we can open it without the context. We have more options with the context. So if we want to do something like I'm doing the min here within the context. But HTTP is just one schema, one protocol. There are others, like S3. We can say, like, you know what? I want to talk directly to S3. Have you used data on a bucket from Amazon before? Yes? OK. Nothing magical under the hood. There are still HTTPS requests. Amazon decided to kind of like name it differently. The only thing is like if we have credentials, we put them there. These are my credentials. Just be careful, don't put it in the notebook. You can use secrets. And then we say the same thing, like I want to cache the request with this strategy. And this is the size. In this case, I'm using 4 megabytes. And the reason why it's like that is because the black formatting likes that than in one single line. And then we see the performance improvement in like getting that data from a remote file system. If we have the environment, let's see, not yet. Yes. Okay, not yet. But if we have the environment, if we had the environment, you will see that FSSpec now has like an information about the caching behavior. So you can like see how many requests were to the cache versus how many requests were actual requests, and that way you can compare the different caching strategies for your data. This is extremely important because of the reasons that I mentioned. So the key takeaways from this notebook are like, if you need to access data that it's not in your local environment, you can use file system spec to abstract that, and FSSpec has a lot of accessors or implementations for different remote systems. And Xarray backends know how to, the ones that know how to read file-like objects in Python or from memory, they can interact very nicely with FSSpec, and that's the case with Dask. When we use Dask in a local, even distributed setting, what we're doing is using FSSpec to talk to this data. And if we combine the two, then we have this powerful way of accessing data that's not in our local environment. Do I have time? Yeah, 5, almost o'clock. So I think that's it. Questions on like I/O? Oh, one thing that I forgot. File system spec is async, so that's great because like it doesn't have to wait for your data to be returned from the remote storage. Well, it could be synchronous, but that's not the default behavior. And it's not locking, so you can do other computations while you're waiting for the data. So that's another, it works on a different thread, I/O. I think that's it. And, well, Scott will say the last words, I guess.
No questions from me.
Oh, yeah, questions for me.
Yeah. I have a question. You mentioned accessing Xarray using Xarray. How does the caching work in that behavior? Because is it using Dask that's already underneath as a backend for accessing Xarray? At this point, Dask is already doing some caching or not?
I think the caching in SAR is disabled because the engine works directly with chunks. So, oh, that's the other thing that I have. I plan to expand this notebook. I forgot to mention that. This is half of the story. The other half of the story is like how the data is chunked, right? So depending on how the data is chunked, we'll have a different access pattern. Like imagine the data, if we had a cube, right? SAR has these chunks already in binary formats. So I think I'm not sure, but I think in the case of SAR, the cache is disabled or it doesn't use read ahead because it gets the chunks in one go. Yeah, so that's, but the main impact factor for like loading HDF and etcdf being slow is that the metadata is kind of like scattered through the file. And with this caching behavior by default, we'll be requesting a lot of unnecessary overheads every time. So that's a problem. More questions? Well, thank you.
It's okay. You can clap. Yeah, we'll just wrap things up here. Basically, I know. Thanks everyone for sticking around till 5. It's definitely a haul to sit through tutorials for an entire day. So I really hope that you've taken away kind of a new familiarity with Xarray, and from this we've heard about kind of the basic data model, computational patterns, indexing. I think this pattern of working with remote data is becoming increasingly common, so having an awareness of like how you interact with these remote data storage systems is really important as well. And then there are all these extensions to Xarray that may do exactly the thing that you're looking for. Xarray is trying to be domain agnostic, and then having all these great additional tools to do it like exactly what you want to do. So it's worth keeping those in mind as well. So thanks again to Jessica, Witsa, Nagin, Luis, Max, and also Tom Nicholas unfortunately couldn't make it last minute, but put in some time for this tutorial. So other Xarray maintainers, and continue to work with this content. There's tons more there to explore on your own time. And we'll be around until 5:30 if you have questions, if you're working with your own data set and just want to ask us over the next half hour, and then just throughout the week too. You know who we are now. And over the next days, we can kind of work one-on-one and help you get started with Xarray. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Oh, and sorry, Jessica just reminded me that these code spaces, they do automatically shut down. I think after 30 minutes, GitHub gives you like 120 hours free per month to use this system. If you want to explicitly close it, you can go to the Xarray tutorial repository, and you will see under code, again, your active code space. Stop just stops it. You can come back to it, and if you've modified things, they should still be there. And deletes actually just gets rid of the entire thing. So we can do that too. It's just a reminder, if you do use it frequently, you can shut it down. Yeah, but thanks again.